I can say without a doubt that the most advanced yoga I have ever done is raising children. And I used to wrap my legs behind my head every morning before coffee. My name is Sarah Ezrin. I'm a writer, yoga teacher, content creator, and the mom to 2 young boys. I recently wrote the book, The Yoga of Parenting, 10 yoga-based practices to help you stay grounded, connect with your kids, and be kind to yourself. One of the highlights of this journey has been sitting down with parents from all around the world to hear how yoga has informed their parenting. Their stories are fascinating, funny, raw, and sometimes heartbreaking. I spoke with step-parents, single parents, grandparents, and though everyone's identities and family structures are completely different, all of these parents have the same intention: to parent from a place of connection. I am honored to share these stories with all of you in this limited series podcast, The Yoga of Parenting. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And I am so happy to sit across right now from Dené Logan, who, as I was just saying before we even started, is really making this whole marriage of science and seeking and yoga and therapy, bringing all of these worlds together. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between the two as well, which I'm happy to pick your brain about. But you were, in addition to teaching yoga all around LA and New York, you are now an associate marriage family therapist and the host of Cheaper Than Therapy, which is like the best podcast name to ever exist. Along with your friend Vanessa Bennett. And I'm really excited to sit down with you and to talk about all the different ways that these different modalities are woven together and the intersections between all of them. And of course, you're a mom, right? That's like, that's our that's our credential right there. So I'm very happy to be here with you. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, Sarah, I'm so honored. And thank you for listening to the podcast. And absolutely, I think the credential of mom is like the most sacred of them all. So thank you for having me on to talk about your book. I'm so excited about all that you're doing as well.
Thank you. It's funny because I'm filling out forms to apply for things. And they're like, what are your credentials? And you write like EYRT, whatever, 500. And like, I don't think they know what that means, but like, I don't have my like MFT, you have your MFT. I don't have that. So I'm just like mom of 2 boys under 4. Like, does this count? Is this my credentials?
Let me be clear. Yes. That's what I know for sure.
Thank you. So how old are your kids?
I have 1 boy and he just turned 6 not that long ago.
Yeah. Oh, that's so exciting.
I mean, it's amazing. He's like the most, I feel like, I don't know, because I'm a girl, but like, I didn't know that much about little boys until I had one. And just, he's an Aries. So he's got all of the like most rambunctious, cannot talk him out of anything that he's determined to do energy. It's so beautiful, but also he is so unbelievably loving and just like cuddly. And everyone's like, when I say that, they're like, oh yeah, little boys with their mamas, boy, they are just like so sweet. But he is like the most tender, loving soul. It's really, it's amazing. I feel so lucky.
So when is his birthday, by the way? Is it April?
It's March 24th.
Okay, because mine is April 10th, so also an Aries.
So you know.
Oh, girl. So he had colic in the beginning, which he did have because he had digestive stuff. But I was talking to a lactation consultant who also has an Aries baby. And when she was like, wait, when's his birthday? And I told her April 10th. And she's like, oh, I bet it's because he's an Aries. So he was like 2 months old at the time. I'm like, what do you mean? And now that he's a year, I'm like, oh my goodness, I think a lot of that was like stubbornness and personality, which is like very, obviously wonderful traits in the world, not as wonderful when you're trying to get him and a 4-year-old out the door. So it's just so funny. Yeah. And I'm not an expert in any of that, but oh my goodness.
Yeah, I feel like if you're a mom to an Aries, you know exactly what we're saying. The distinction is a very real one. Absolutely.
So tell me about the timelines of when you were teaching yoga, when you started going and getting your master's, and have you made a full pivot into therapy, or are you still teaching yoga on the side? What's that relationship look like?
Yeah, I do, as you were mentioning, I partner with my friend Vanessa Bennett, who is also a marriage and family therapist. I'm like, Dené, can you speak? Marriage and family therapist as well. And we run retreats together throughout the year. So when I'm doing retreats, either with Vanessa or by myself, I will still teach some yoga, but for the most part, I'm full-time therapist. And, being a mama to a 6-year-old boy, my schedule is pretty full. So, yeah, but I miss it. And I wish that I had the opportunity to teach more than I do, to be honest. When I get to lead a workshop or do something down in the South Bay where I used to teach pretty regularly, I'm like, oh, I miss my people.
Mhm.
But I taught yoga for, gosh, I'm trying to think how many years to circle back to your question. I feel like I did my first teacher training in New York. I lived in Manhattan for like 2 years, and I did my first teacher training in 2005. God, I'm aging myself.
No,
Um,
girl, it's fine. We're all the.
yeah, and then I moved to LA in 2008, and I got a job at a studio that people who lived in LA probably know about, Yoga Works and Excel Center for Sacred Movement. They were sort of like, when I moved here, it was like,
Yeah.
I'd never seen anything like it. It was like, this is like the yoga mecca. Like I would go into classes with like 150 people in a room doing yoga, and I'd never seen anything like that, Sarah. I was like, what is happening? This is like a movement. This is so beautiful. So I was just like blown away and so excited. And got a job at the front desk at Exhale. And I was just so fortunate that they would let me sort of hop into teacher trainings whenever we weren't busy. So I got to learn from some of the most incredible teachers, just little tidbits of wisdom. And then just started teaching there and at some other studios around LA. And I did that for, gosh, maybe 12 years. I don't know, really long time. And then I went back to school to get my master's in 2015, mostly because I was teaching and I loved it. But I feel like, well, certainly I've always loved therapy and have, just gotten so much value from my relationships with different therapists throughout the years. But also, one, some of the teachers that I was so profoundly impacted by the work they were doing, a couple of which you named. Halakuri was someone
Mm.
who was just like a really impactful teacher. To me. And I knew that she had gone to Pacifica, where I ended up going to grad school. And so I kind of had like watched her path unfolding. And there was so much about the way she spoke to her experience that just like really resonated. But then also, I feel like, and you've probably experienced this a bit, when you're a yoga teacher, so much comes up somatically, and people have so many emotions that are coming to the surface that they're wanting to process with you. And a lot of times they're wanting to talk about some things that are coming up in their personal lives. And honestly, I would feel like really equipped. I'd be like, well, I'm not a therapist. So I don't know that, I mean, I can hold space to an extent, but there are some things that I feel like, especially like in a room full of people, this isn't the container for this stuff to be explored a little bit deeper. And I just felt hungry to be able to hold space for those conversations, I think. But
Mm.
yeah, it's a little bit of how I got there.
That's so cool. And so if you started in 2015, so then was your practice just getting off the ground when you first had your son? Was this all happening kind of simultaneously?
Oh yeah, I got pregnant in grad school,
Oh my
and
gosh.
I think I was like doing my practicum. And that was like a fascinating animal too, as a therapist, because you learn so much about like transference and countertransference and
Yeah.
like, how people are experiencing you in the room and how you're experiencing them. And being pregnant while I was, your practicum experience is a lot of times community mental health. And so it's just like what's beautiful about that is the populations you work with are just whoever comes in the door. Like now I primarily work with couples, but when you're in your practicum, you're learning how to work with all different kinds of groups of people. So like, I don't work with adolescents anymore at all,
Mm.
really. But you may in your practicum. So it would just be interesting to see how people would respond to me when I was like 9 months pregnant. Like, men would be, have a certain energetic, like kids would have a certain energetic around you versus like when you're not a pregnant woman, everybody is very, I think energetically people just like really are sort of protective of women when they're pregnant. I think I
Yeah.
would like be walking down the street sometimes. I don't know if you experienced this, but people would just be like smiling at me like they knew me or something. And I'd be like, why are they smiling at me? And I'd be like, oh yes, it's my big belly. They're smiling at it. It's not so much me. But yeah, that was definitely an interesting experience. And also holding space for like women who wanted to be pregnant and couldn't be
Mm.
pregnant or couldn't get pregnant. And us processing what that would bring up to, sit together while I was pregnant and the grief that would come to the surface. So it was a really expansive opportunity for learning for me. And then also just early motherhood while I was like just starting my private practice and like getting in there, and just that thing of like feeling like every part of me wanted to stay home and be with this little boy. And I didn't expect that. I really didn't think that I would be so attached to him. I was kind of like, I don't know, I'll probably be out for like a month. And I think so much of my feminine like instincts to be with him and just like really hunker down took me by surprise. And so that was an interesting thing too, to feel like, no, I need to keep doing this, building this. I sort of had some momentum with, opportunities that were coming up and a private practice that I really wanted to work in, but I also felt like this, but I really want to stay home with my kid.
The push pull of it. I had a similar with my first two. Like, it wasn't my intention to have kids or have a family for a very long
Mhm.
time. I was like very happy, traveling the world and
Mhm.
career focused, which I now know, we could go into my therapy session later, which was just, a cover up for fear of intimacy. But,
Yes.
after having my son, and I was like, I'll be back. I'll see y'all in like, a month or 2 months. I'll be back really soon. And like, it was 6 months before I went back to teaching after him.
Yeah.
And even that was resistant. It's been a year. It took me a year to come back to teaching after my second.
Mm.
But it's just interesting how it's like your whole brain chemistry shifts, your body chemistry shifts, and suddenly, you're on a completely different route than you could have even imagined. Even when you have this dharma and you have this passion and you absolutely love what you do, and you still have the hunger for it, it all gets it gets so redirected and jumbled, right? As you come out on this other side as a new mom.
Yes, absolutely. To everything you said. I think it really, it is. And I think that some of this is that, and to your point, this is a whole other conversation, but I think that there's a way that society doesn't really hold the sacred container for that period of transition and that rite of passage that motherhood is. You are not the same person that you sort of go into that threshold of initiation. You come out on the other side and you are forever changed. And I think collectively we used to understand that and hold space for that. And there used to be a little bit more like community ushering women into that
Mhm.
space where we're really sort of doing that by ourselves and in our little nuclear family structures. And I am such an introverted person that it really took me by surprise how hungry I felt to be close to other women and sharing my experience in a more collective way, in a way that I had never experienced until I had a baby. And I just was so hungry for like, you know, connectivity with other feminine energy. And it was fascinating. But I ended up writing my thesis about like that process of transitioning from maiden to mother, because I think it was such a jarring experience by how much it was different than what I expected.
I was actually going to write an article too, because I'm very introverted. That was
Mm,
motherhood made me an extrovert, because
mm,
it's that same desire. Like if, when we were by ourselves as just a couple, or even before I met my husband, like I would travel on the weekends, but then I'd be home and staying at home. But, for the most part, I was very happy just binge watching Netflix. But, when suddenly I need community in ways that I had not needed them since I was like a teenager,
yeah.
and when groups were such an important part of forming
Mm,
your relationships. And I absolutely think that it's that stepping into the new role and the importance of community. So how were you balancing all of those things? Because, I assume, and this is obviously, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would you have chosen to pause starting your practice and
mm,
a little bit, and then maybe waited to go in? But obviously this is just, with Britta Bushnell calls it like the overculture, right? Of like, gotta go, gotta get going, time, just finished, gotta graduate, gotta start. Would you, like, in a perfect world, would you have
yeah.
maybe hit the brakes a little bit more, or did it all, and it is divine timing. So like, I know I'm like leading your answer, but you know what I'm asking. My question is,
Yeah.
would you have wanted more time if you could have gotten it?
I mean, I love the question, and nobody's ever asked me that. So I am
As I'm like
genuinely
leading you into your answer, I'm sorry.
no, no, I'm just like I'm thinking what feels true as you say that, because I do feel like it's all perfect. I'm as I was saying, I'm primarily a couples therapist, and I'm so passionate about the fact that the way that we are doing family really isn't supportive of women. And certainly men as well, but I think, like the family structure as well. But I think that I wish that I'd had more support, or that I'd known how to ask for more support, or figure out how to do that. And I think that what I end up seeing a lot with couples, and was certainly a part of my experience, was that I was trying to do so much that it was really like me still like in a really masculine, like tackle this, handle all of this role. And it was really detrimental to my relationship. I'm no longer with my kid's dad. Now, all of that being said, my kid has the most phenomenal father in the world. And so the reason I was able to continue getting my master's and getting into private practice was that his dad really stepped in and did so much, and was just such an unbelievably supportive partner. But I think two people attempting to do all of what it is to work and have a family is just really not enough. And I think it was, you know, I don't think at the time I realized that I was depressed or that I was really struggling. But in retrospect, I think I was just sort of like muscling my way through what was a really, really difficult time. And I think it can be really confusing to the psyche, um, because on the one hand, I was so unbelievably in love with this little boy. And on the other hand, I was just so really disconnected from myself and from like anything that felt like a life that I recognized. And just, I think if I hadn't had my clients and the work that I was doing that I actually did find really inspiring, I think it would have been a darker period for me, to be honest, than it ended up being. But when I went and I would be able to be of service and supporting people with what they were going through, I felt a little bit of like it was pulling me out of something that felt really challenging. And so, kind of a complex answer to the question, but I think that in my perfect world, I and women in general would have more support in that time, because I think that so often what we are calling postpartum depression, and I don't think that that's not the case at all, but I think a lot of what, depth psychology, is the form of psychology that I come from and that I study. And I think it's with whatever the thing is that we're going through, it's like, what has this come to teach me? What is this really tuning me into, and or attempting to get me to tune into? And I think for me, in retrospect, I think it was a need for more community, an ability to receive support. And that was hard for me. I was very much, that's not really the woman that I was conditioned to be. I didn't, I was very like, I can handle it. I can tackle everything. It was hard for me to receive the support that was certainly there. But I think that might be the thing, like, and I do think it's all perfect. I think there are so many things that I've come to understand. But, my younger self, if there were one thing that I could like, not even say to her, but that I can see about what she was going through that I couldn't see at the time, it was that she needed more help, and she needed a little bit more. And it's not even necessarily like the physical help. It's the more like, this is all really natural. This is what it feels like to be a new mother. And I just felt like really lost in that space.
I've been doing some like inner child work, and it's like, I'll bring out the 12-year-old and all, even the 15-year-old is starting to come out. But
Mm,
recently I started to like imagine like my pregnant self or
mm,
my early new mom self, because like, yes, okay, this was only, within the last 3.5 years, but it's been such a shift and transition. And there was so much, and similar, that's why I was kind of leading the question, right? And I now I know you come from depth psychology, that it makes sense that there's a field of psychology that's like that. And, this is what I mean, at least in my yoga practice, it's like, this is the blessings, right? On the other side
mm,
of the challenges. But it's always just it doesn't matter that, yes, okay, I would not choose anything different. I would want to come to this moment, but it was still hard AF, right? It was
yes.
still, there were still moments where I felt unmoored and completely disconnected, and
Mm,
where I was trying to get it all done. And I wish I could be there now and like put my arm around myself and be like, it's okay, you don't have to do that.
yeah.
But I also sometimes wonder too, and this is just getting very heady, like, we wouldn't be at this moment were it not for that other moment. So it's almost like you have to kind of go through that gauntlet of all those things to get to the other side. So what would you say to a new mom that's a friend of yours that is having a baby now, or somebody that may be listening, a new parent that is expecting, dad or otherwise, however they identify, a new parent who's expecting a child and they're about to step through that threshold? Is there any advice that you would give them on, especially the juggle between holding your dharma and your passion and also stepping into this new role as parent?
I think it's a little bit of that. I think with families and couples and new mamas, certainly, I really attempt to normalize the hard. I attempt to normalize this as a season of your life and not what it will be forever. And I think that holding it as a season with challenges is really important to normalize, because that's the aspect that it can be even really difficult for us to say out loud, acknowledge for ourselves that there is grief in early motherhood. There is an aspect of who I was that I will never be again. There is a carefree nature of being the maiden who doesn't have to answer to anyone and do whatever I want whenever I want, that is gone. And as many blessings as there are in motherhood, and as many things that are so unbelievably beautiful about that time, it is so unbelievably exhausting and so unbelievably just like giving of yourself to the point of depletion. And I think certainly if you have the ability to have people help you figure out what feels like the best way for you to receive support, like what would your ideal form of support look like, and really ask for that, and I would say, like, before the baby comes, sort of like put some systems in place to have that support. And I think if we're speaking heteronormatively, I think it's a really challenging time for couples, because especially when women are nursing, and there's just like so much about what I see is fathers in early motherhood are just sort of like, or excuse me, early parenthood are just sort of like, what do I do? Like, what's my role here? And I think understanding that there's got to be a way that we sort of put some structures in place for that as well. I love to like really normalize for couples that there's like the before you have a child, there's the 2 years, and then there's like your relationship after that. But that those 2 years are just challenging for couples in a way that I think societally we don't really talk about. And so much of that is that I think at that 2 year mark, and I don't know if this has been your experience, I'd love to hear, but it's like you start to return to, it's not like you're the woman that you were, but some sort of like a self outside of like the motherhood fog of like, where am I? And so I think it can be really certainly alienating for us as women, but I don't think we talk about like how difficult and alienating that can be for the men in our lives, and how much they go through an experience of grief as well, because the woman that has been sort of their partner, is really overtaken with the experience, the love, the, all consuming energy of this new life. And it can be a little bit like, well, suck it up, this baby needs me. And that's not that that's not real, but there is a real, just feeling of like abandonment in that. Let's, I guess, like name it as it is. And it's complex, but it's so much of what I see happen in couples that I think that we don't really speak to or understand. So what I suggest a lot of time is, if there is support that, if it's like financially feasible, or we have family that can support us, I think it's really important that couples carve out time away from being parents and being two human beings getting to know one another outside of this role. And that can feel really, really hard with a new baby. But I think it's really, really important as soon as we can to get back into the space of being a self, being two people who are in relationship with one another, aside from just being parents. And I think for each parent individually, that's important too. Who am I in this new role? Not just myself as a parent, but also myself in this next iteration of my life. Because to me, what's important about that is like, what do I want to teach my child about who I am in the world outside of myself as a parent? Because if I am completely consumed in the identity of motherhood, that is what I am teaching my child about what they get to be and what they get to do. And it's not, please don't hear me at all. Anyone listening is in any way saying the identity of mother is not like the most important role. Of course it is. And Carl Jung said there is no greater burden placed upon children than the unlived lives of their parents.
Mm.
And I think the thing that I'm starting to like really have a visceral sense of is my little's in kindergarten now, and he's like, 6 is like all of a sudden they're just like such individual people, and this is my gang, and bye mom, and like I can feel already he's not going to need me forever. Like that time is like, it feels like 5 minutes ago that he was just like my newborn baby in my arms, and so it's important for me to have a sense of self as well, so that he doesn't feel like he has to hold himself back in any way from being the fullest embodiment of who he came here to become in order to take care of mama, because they are like little GPS systems, and they like just tune into us, and they can sense like if we want them to stay close to us so that we don't feel like we don't have the role of mother anymore, they will do that for us.
Mm.
And I think it's really important for us to not put that burden on them.
There was like so many things there that I was like, oh, I wish I was like, oh, I was writing them down, and I'll get to re-listen later. So everybody get to pause and take those. But I love the suggestions of the parents, I think really what it distills down to is kind of where you ended on, which is that it comes down to maintaining that sense of self first and foremost,
Mm,
then the dyad, then the greater role of family, and that all these things are, important, but that role of self and that sense of self, which is, I think, I mean, and like, you got to study with some amazing teachers, I'm sure. When you said those dates, I'm sure you've got like Shiva Ray and Eric Shipman and, everybody, and I'm sure they were all talking,
mm,
similarly. It kind of reminds me of big self, small self. I don't know, and I know you talk about that a little bit on your website, but
mm.
that like in some ways, and not to diminish it. And obviously, again, yes, motherhood is one of the most important things we'll ever do in our lives. But at the
Yes,
end of the day, it is a role, and
that's
it
right.
is just, as like they say in the Bhagavad Gita, right? Like, it's like, it is just another outfit that we're donning for this
Mm,
lifetime.
mm.
And what are you working on that deeper level? So that all of these amazing, wonderful things, which are you can enjoy and love, but you remember that underneath it all, there's something that's steadier that needs tending to.
Yeah, so well said. Absolutely.
Is that accurate?
Could not
Well,
agree more.
and yeah, and then what do you do? Like, how do you tend to that, in the throes of parenting? So you had asked me too, like my experience with the first 2 years, I was pregnant already. I got
Mm,
pregnant at 20 months while still breastfeeding my first. So it all kind of bled together, but I do know, like, my husband would often say, like, you only have patience for the baby, or
mm,
you only have patience for our first son. And it's that, you end up pouring yourself into the role, and there really isn't much left for others.
yes.
So what do you do in your own time, and what did you do in the early years, and what do you do now to cultivate your big S self, to spend
Mhm.
that time with yourself, to really fill your cup so that you have something to give others?
Yeah, I think, Sarah, to me, motherhood is one of the most profound spaces of put the oxygen mask on yourself first so that you are able to show up for others. Now, I will say and own I didn't do that very
Mm.
well early in motherhood, and to the detriment, excuse me, to a lot of things, to myself and how I was feeling about myself and where I was. I think, as is the case for so many of us, I was able to muscle through and get a lot of things done, and I accomplished some things. But again, in retrospect, I can see how I was sort of short tempered. I was, not always my highest self with my kid's dad. And I, he's my best friend, and we have the greatest relationship still. But there was certainly some amends that needed to be made on my part for ways that I just couldn't see where I was and how much I was struggling, and how he ended up being the place that I projected some of that. Right. Um, what I have since learned, since the two of us separated, that I've really found useful in supporting couples is, I think, what has been the advantage, and this is what nobody tells anybody about, like, once you, are in a two-parent household, is that, well, first of all, I mean, I think we had a little bit of co-parenting boot camp because there was, like, a pandemic, and he ended up, like, staying in the guest house for a large portion of like the early part of 2020. And so it was, fascinating to be doing therapy out of the house. But then also I had a young baby, but then my kid's dad was in the back house. So it was like, in a lot of ways, we were unbelievably fortunate, as much as at the time we were like, we just want to be separated.
On top of each other.
But we had to work it out. We were like two kids that like someone like put us in a room and said, figure it out, guys. And we did. And I think it made us so much closer and shift into the transition of what it meant to have a friendship in a really beautiful way. But what it has also helped me in understanding, and this is what I was saying about what nobody tells you about co-parenting, is there's such an ability to divide and conquer that our society has not really held space for or normalized from my perspective. And so what I mean is, what I really suggest to couples and to families is that I think a lot less either one thing being everybody or one person's responsibility, meaning, the whole like fair play and that like movement in that book is really about how much moms are doing in addition to like the actual like caring for the children and a lot of times working just as much as the men in the household. There's also the emotional labor and the keeping up with the birthday parties and who needs a present for this. And this is what we need to take the teacher on this day. That is like what the mothers are carrying in addition to just the role of mothering. So it's like I get done with work, whatever I'm doing at the end of the day, and then my second shift starts. And that is still a place where there's like a real lack of equity in our partnerships. And what I suggest a lot of times is that there just needs to be a lot more dividing and conquering in general done. But the caveat of the divide and conquer means if it's not on my list, I'm not in it. Because what we as women, and guilty, oftentimes end up doing is I'm going to give this to you, but then I'm going to energetically micromanage the way you do it. And that's not the way that I would do it. And that's actually sort of counterproductive and puts our partner in a space of like, well, if you're going to do it anyway, then I'm just not going to bother, which is often why, some of the men in our lives will sort of shut down, not be there, actively participating in whatever the thing is we would love for them to do. So it has to be like that person is going to do it their way, and I'm not going to let perfect be the enemy of the good enough. And what they do is what they're handling. But in that dividing and conquering, I also think it's really important for us to have time where we get to be a self outside of the role of partner and mother. And so that is what I have been gifted in the space of co-parenting is, when my kid is with his dad, I am Dené. I get to like be off a little bit. Most moms don't have that. And it's such a like filling space of my tank to just like not only get the things done that I need to get done, which a lot of times we just don't feel like we have time and space for, but also to like remember who I am outside of that role. But we can have that in our partnerships as well. And so I really work to support couples in how do we do that divide and conquering while in, the same home, in the same container. And a lot of times that looks like I carve out that Saturday mornings are for mom and the kids are with dad and I am not in what they're doing in the same way that like when my kid is with his dad, I don't know what they're doing. He'll send me pictures of their activities and I'm like, amazing, but I'm not coordinating it. I'm not figuring it out. I'm not like in it. I am doing me. And I think we need so much more of that societally. And, again, that's that whole thing of like, we don't feel like we have enough support for that. We don't have enough of the resources for that. But I think there are ways that we can restructure it. It's just a little bit like we need to get out of like, this is any person's role. It's like, who's the best at doing the laundry? Who really rocks it out when it comes to like, I don't know, fixing whatever needs to be fixed outside, whatever the roles are, let's divide and conquer. But then when that's that other person's role, because we all live here, then I'm not in it,
And when you have your son, you are 100% on, right? So then there's the other side where you don't have anybody to hand off to if things do get overwhelming. I mean, it sounds like he's 6, so things are getting a little easier. I hope. I'm like, please, you could leave him in his room and no, he's not going to like eat an eraser.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that, and you're naming something that I always want to be mindful of, and that I am very fortunate in that I do get along with my kid's dad really well. And that's not everyone's situation. And I want to name that and be mindful of that. And so if it is one of my days and and I'm overwhelmed or I need support because something comes up, I'm able to ask him for that. And not everybody has that situation. But I do feel like there is something about, have you read the book, The Celestine Prophecy?
Mm-mm. I mean,
It's
I
such
know
a
it,
good book.
but yeah.
It's a little read for anyone who's listening, but it's like become my favorite book, and I've read it in the last couple of years. But they talk about how all of us are competing for energy in that book, and it's something that I had like intuitively sensed, but I didn't have anyone articulating it until I read it in that book. But here's why I'm telling you this because it's fascinating. What I find ends up happening is it will be easier, and you will notice this when you have like just one of your children and it's just you, it will be easier for you than like if your husband is there or if like, like there's like this competing for energy thing that happens. And so
Mm,
if your child is not competing for your energy with your husband or with your other child, they'll be like easy peasy.
mm,
But if it's like a whole bunch of energy in the room, then everybody's competing for energy and everybody's sort of like, look at me. And so there, again, are ways to manage that. And it's a lot of times just bringing into our consciousness, this is what's happening. And a lot of times being the container of our own energy. And some of that can be just observing what's coming up for me. What's the story I'm telling myself about what this person should be doing? What else could be true? Or even naming the energy someone is bringing to me. So if one of my kiddos is like, super frustrated and like angry, it's like, oh, buddy, you're feeling a lot of angry frustration right now. And there's something about naming the thing that sort of starts to diffuse that energy a little bit. But again, I think that it's fascinating to me how sometimes my kid will be like a little angel and then like his dad will come in and like we'll be talking to each other because now we're just like friends a lot of times like catching up and he'll start competing for the energy with his dad and it feels like a lot of times
yeah.
all of a sudden I'm like you were fine 5 minutes ago what happened, but it's like he feels his dad taking the energy from me and he wants it back. It's just I think fascinating.
Okay. Well, I have to read that like immediately when we finish talking
Such a
because
good
I
book.
1000% feel that. I mean, it was very overwhelming for me first to like be living with anybody other than a dog, right? When it was
Mm.
just me and my partner and that kind of competition of energy of just taking it from me. And then to, add in my first son and feeling triangulated. And then when you add
Yes.
in the second child, so we are definitely in the phase where like if I'm out with just one child, it's like vacation. Like that's the joke, even if
Yes.
you're like out in public. So it's really interesting to hear it described like that because it makes a lot of sense. And I don't know if you feel this way, like as a yoga practitioner too, and especially somebody that's into mindfulness, like I want to be really concentrated on one thing. So if I'm
Mm.
talking to my toddler and my baby starts crying, I mean, that's like, it feels like a complete splitting of selves. Or if my husband is calling me down the hall, I'm always like, I can't yell from down the hall. I'm not going to do that because I'm really trying to like, focus my energy on those individuals. And it's challenging to do when you're in a group of people. And I don't know if maybe that's just because we practice yoga or our introverted natures. We, it's like we're, very conscious and intentional about how we share our energy.
I think that there are those who, as I was about to say that, that sounded a little bit like righteous, and I didn't mean it that way at all. But I think that some people are a little bit more sensitive to energy, to be honest. And
Yeah.
I think that I think we are all sensitive to energy, but I think that practices like yoga can bring us into attunement with some of that sensitivity a little bit more, and maybe have a way of naming it, maybe have a way of like, you know, I don't know if you've experienced this in your life at all, but there was a time where I was like really disconnected to my body or to like what it felt like. Like I will eat something, like I don't eat dairy now because it doesn't really sit well in my system. I will know instantly if I've started to eat some dairy. Like I'm just like the attunement to like what's happening internally is a lot stronger for me than it used to be. Um, Oh, but what I was gonna say about what you were saying about, like, really focusing our energy on one place, I think our nervous systems are not really designed to take in all of the energy and all of the information that our modern society would suggest we should be able to.
Mm,
James Hillman is one of my favorite depth psychologists, and he talks about depression is psyche's way of saying, "I will not participate in mania. I will not continue at this pace." And I think there's so much about the way that we are conditioned to believe we quote should be living that is really overwhelming to our nervous system. And again, in the Celestine prophecy, they talk about how children need the attention of one adult at a time. And this is, of course, in an ideal world, that's not always possible or the case, but that in an ideal world, that child, because like when you think about your children, like they want to tell you so much and share so much with you, and they have questions about so many things. But if we're sort of like attempting to not only respond to whatever they're asking us, but also handle this for work, and also my husband is wondering about this, and that is what it feels like for us so much of the time. And we really sort of shame ourselves for not being able to be in that level of attunement without it feeling difficult, but we're really not designed to.
Mm.
And so I think it's not to say like, there's all these things that aren't necessarily problems that we're able to solve, but they're sort of paradoxes for us to be aware of and manage and say, this is what's happening. There's no reason for me to feel shame about this. This doesn't make me a bad mom. What this means is that I'm a human being. And there are certain things that my nervous system maybe isn't designed to do. We weren't always like taking in all of the constant information that we are now. We didn't have like computers in our hands at all times, streaming information about what everybody thinks about everything. And our nervous systems are a little bit shot, to be honest. And so it's just like, how do I be gentle with myself? How do I say to my partner, like, mommy's a little fried? Can I have like 5 minutes, even sometimes just that 5 minutes of sitting down somewhere, feet on the ground, all of the tools I know, you probably tap into to just come back into my breath and back into my body. It's amazing what it can feel like, just to give ourselves that permission slip to come back into ourselves and not make ourselves wrong for being human.
Oh, I think that's so important. And like, because it is like you go into these things and you're always looking for the solution and you're like, how can I reprogram my brain to be able to
Mm,
better do these things? But to accept it as no, this is being human, and this is being human in this time. And,
yeah.
can you be kind to yourself? Can you give yourself grace? And can you do the things you need to do to come back and to be grounded? I'm curious, when you are with your son, by yourself, and we were talking about single moms by choice or people that don't have a partner around, and you
Yeah.
do need to be grounded. Do you have conversations with him too? Like, are you like, okay, mom's got to sit, and I don't know, is he on mommy? Are you at mom now? Are you at the mom stage? Is it
No,
mom? Where are you?
I'm still mommy. And I got to tell you, my
Okay.
kid, like his teacher will like laugh. She's like, you can tell you're a therapist because he definitely knows about like the nervous system. And he's definitely like, I model it for him because
Yeah.
I think it's important for him to understand that sometimes he's going to need time to like be with himself and take a big breath. And I talk to him about mommy feeling flooded. I think he knows what an introvert is and that mommy's nervous system gets a little overwhelmed sometimes, right? And I talked to him about like needing to just like take a couple minutes to be with myself and, can you color for a second while mommy goes into the bathroom? I'm just feeling a little bit overwhelmed and I need a second, right? And I think it's important for us to normalize that being what's happening inside of us. One, because it gives them permission to do that for themselves. But also, I don't want him to internalize my needing 5 minutes as having anything to do with him. So I really name it as like, this is mommy's feeling flooded. Mommy's feeling overwhelmed with all the things that are on her plate. And so I'm going to take a minute. Can you sit here and draw me a picture while I go do that? And I think it just gives him language sometimes for what's happening that he might not understand, but he feels it. He feels my overwhelm.
It's the other day, my husband, because our youngest is my Aries child, is extremely loud and like screams, whether he's happy or whether he wants something. And it's, I mean, screaming like to the point where like we like take him places and people are like, that's a loud baby. Like a woman that
Oh,
had like 8 children was like, that's the loudest baby I've ever heard. But he said to me the other day, he's like, it's really grating on my nervous system. And I was like, yeah. Like the
aw.
language landed.
You're
This
like,
is it's my family. I
my
love
heart.
you.
That's beautiful. I love it.
What does your yoga practice look like these days?
Oh, goodness. I mean, I go through periods of I run pretty consistently. I think that was something I picked back up during the pandemic, and I just like needed to be doing something. So I got a treadmill and I do that pretty consistently, but I will go through like spurts. Right now I'm a little bit of a Pilates spurt. So I'm kind of like feeling the reformer Pilates again. But then, I feel like I incorporate yoga outside of the asana practices into everything. I feel like it's just such a a way that I move through the world. And that can be just like giving myself a little bit of few extra moments in bed, but like really being mindful with myself and like tuning in the way that, I might if I were on my mat. And yeah, but I definitely I miss some of the studios that I used to go to around LA. I don't get out as much as I used to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I try to really make it a point in the book and, in these conversations and like, you obviously know and the experts that I get to speak with, but I think when we say yoga, the general public automatically assumes the poses. So it's really nice to remind people that, at
Mm,
its core really is about connection and, the quieting of the mind. So whatever the modalities may be, that could be your running, it could be your Pilates at the time, it could be that quiet moment in bed. I love that you have all those things for you.
yeah.
What's the most, and this is how I like to end all these conversations, but what's the most surprising way? And we can talk about asana or just yoga as an umbrella. What's the most
Mm.
surprising way that your yoga has influenced your parenting?
Oh, I love that question. Well, I'm gonna bring it into my meditation practice because that is my non-negotiable. I meditate every morning as soon as I wake up, and I love that my little boy knows that as a non-negotiable. Some days he will come in and want to sit with me. Some days he's like, "Are you done meditating already?" He just like he likes to have his time like with his dinosaurs or whatever he's doing, and he kind of expects that mommy's going to have at least 15 minutes in the morning to just like sit with herself. And I love that that is something from, I think, his earliest memories. He will have as, a practice that his mom had in her life, because I think that hopefully my wish is that that is something that he will continue to incorporate into his life, into his days as he gets bigger.
I thought you meant when you're like, "Are you done already? Like, you really need another 10 minutes, mom." I'm not,
Yeah, no.
maybe that will
I
be
would
maybe
probably be
another
like,
10
"Yes,
years.
no problem, I'll go back." But yeah, no, it's more like I wanna keep playing or doing whatever I'm doing, that you weren't distracting me or making me come eat or get dressed or whatever.
Very sweet and very
Mm.
wonderful. Well, where can everybody find you? And, Cheaper Than Therapy podcast, everybody should follow and listen. And then where else can they find you individually? You're practicing in LA now, right?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I'm not really taking on as many clients right now. I just finished writing my first book, which is coming out next year. So that was a little bit like taking up a lot of time and space. So
Congratulations. That's a
thank
big
you and
deal. That's a
congrats.
baby.
I
There's
mean,
your
I
second
ended,
baby.
right? So
Whew.
it's definitely a big part of or chunk of life for a while you're working on it. So just sent that in to the publisher, and lost my train of thought. That'll be coming out next year. But then right now, I'm on Instagram a lot, as you mentioned, Dené Logan, DENE.LOGAN, and sharing whatever's coming up with the clients that I'm working with there. And yeah, just the podcast and stuff like that. But
And you all do retreats too, right? Because
we
you're going to
do.
Costa Rica next week. So,
Thank you for that
where
reminder.
can, yeah, well, where can people find more information about those retreats if they want to join? And obviously, this is going to be evergreen. So, like, if they're, maybe Costa Rica will be done by the time
Aw,
people hear this. But I'm
yeah.
sure other ones will be coming up. Where can they find that information?
Yeah, so my website's Dené Logan Sulkin. But honestly, I'm not real great with the website. I like him the upkeep of all the things. I'm not
So much.
great.
There's so many things.
Oh my gosh. But I do keep my LinkedIn pretty up to date. So LinkedIn, I'm not on LinkedIn either. What is it? Linktree. Linktree on all of the socials. So if you go to my social, wherever the link is, it'll sort of give you updated info on whatever retreats and stuff. That I do keep up to date. I'm pretty good about that. The rest of the stuff, try my best, but yeah,
There's so many things.
so many.
Yeah. Who knew when
Yes.
we were like decided to teach yoga or even like, become a therapist that you'd also have to be like an editor and, audio specialist and
Girl.
a videographer.
It's
There's
like
just so many.
I cannot even try to pretend. I know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for the people that are going to be watching this on YouTube, Danae has the amazing, obviously as a pro podcast host, you've got the headphones, you've got the mic. It sounds
Oh.
amazing. So you're doing great. I'm really grateful to you. I'm grateful for all that you share in the world and all the different ways that you share. And I'm so happy we are officially connected finally.
No.
And I just want to thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, such a gift to get to be with you. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Yoga of Parenting. Everything we discussed will be found in our show notes. You can purchase a copy of the Yoga of Parenting book anywhere books are sold. And please remember to subscribe, rate, and share these episodes so we can get all this wisdom to as many parents as possible. Follow me on Instagram at Sarah Ezrin Yoga, and the original music that you heard both at the beginning and just a moment ago is by the amazing Egeman Sonley. You can follow Ege on IG at Egesan, Egesan, and you can find all of his amazing music on Spotify. Big thanks to Kyle Rebar for being the best producer that there ever was, and big thanks to all of you for listening.